Greetings and welcome to the Quantum Ogre Cast, the topical TTRPG podcast you were destined to encounter, no matter what choices you made. I am your elder goblin host, Jorbin, and I'm joined today by a sensible Ogier guest, Trent of Jface Games. What's going on, Trent?
Not too much. I'm excited to be here, buddy.
Cool. Well, I'm going to start things off with a rapid fire round of your real life character sheet.
Oh,
Not
Lord.
a player, not a character rather that you've played, but this is all about you, Jface. So whatever pops in your head, you ready?
Oh, God. I guess so. Let's do this.
Okay. Your alignment.
My alignment? It's probably, to be fair, lawful good.
Lawful good. Okay.
Probably.
Curveball. Non-human ancestry you relate most to.
Non-human ancestry that I relate to. Ooh, I wouldn't. It's one of those things where I probably want it to be dwarf because that would be cool, but it's probably like a halfling, to be honest.
Okay, halfling. That's fine. That's what Dwarfdan said. All right, but I want gut reaction. Don't think too hard about this. You're in a dungeon. A monster chases you into a room.
Oh,
You
God.
see a weapon rack. What are
Yes.
you grabbing?
Oh, it's a halberd.
Halberd. All right. Don't be humble for this one. Highest attribute.
Highest attribute? Oh, I would
Don't be humble.
say it's probably. Oh, I gotta think of all of them. There's int, wisdom. It's probably not int. It's probably. I'm gonna say charisma, to be honest, which might sound weird. I hope it's.
You're a YouTuber. I'm not surprised by that answer.
I hope.
All right. Dump stat.
My dump stat. I would probably say Constitution. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Okay. Last but not least, you're building a D&D superhero based solely on aesthetic. What monster do your powers derive from?
A superhero based on aesthetics.
Yeah.
So just the pure look of them.
Yep.
And
Could
so,
be like I'm not going to say it because then I'll. Yeah. Go ahead.
So if I'm creating a monster and it's a superhero.
Yep.
Oh.
Aesthetic, not like level or whatever. CR. Just
Yeah. I guess I'm getting mixed up with the superhero / aesthetic, but I'm gonna go with it. Probably has a spawn-like cape that kind of billows and is alive itself. That just seems
like a
awesome to me.
mimic cape.
Maybe, yeah, I'd go with that. Or probably not a mimic cape. I would say more like a cloaker cape. If you have it with an actual cloaker cape that you rip off and throw on people.
Okay, Cloaker Man. Cool. Yeah, maybe in the future I'll have to reword that one.
That's a tricky one. I'm thinking as aesthetics and superhero. Because I want to go straight down superhero powers, but then I have to think about no, it's not the powers.
Right. That's why I kind of had to throw in not the CR, not the level, just aesthetic.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because that one might not make the forever list there because
that's okay.
That was
I think it's good. I think it's good.
But okay. So today we're going to talk about player motivations.
Yeah.
Player motivations, player characters, how to weave a character's story into your game if that's your bag. If not, we're going to talk about reasons not to. So, real quick, like, what games have you been playing lately? Like, what are you jamming on right now?
Oh, okay. So, currently, the main game I've been jamming on is my own. So, I'm currently making a game, and Brandon at ROON HAMMAH is going to be publishing it once I get the book done. So, but I've been playing that as a campaign with my buddies. Besides that game, which is Scattered Isles, besides that game, the last TTRPG I was playing would have been Shadow of the Weird Wizard, which was awesome.
Oh, man.
It was so good.
Not that I wasn't excited about your game.
Oh, no, I get it. Yeah, you're like, all right, come on, get to the next one. No, Shadow of the Weird Wizard's been fantastic. I've got a campaign going with that, and it's like, I think we're just doing 10 sessions, and we're on session 8. We finished session 8, so we got 2 more left with that, so that's been fun. And then I've been playing a ton of board games. Like, I just had a board game weekend with a bunch of buddies, and we did like Slay the Spire, the card game. We did Cthulhu Wars. Man. We've done a ton of stuff there where we kind of scratch our like convention game itch with the biggest ones we can find. We put on the table. So it's been awesome. How about you? What games have you been playing?
First off, that's cool. I just discovered Slay the Spire, the video game. I'm like 5 years late for that probably or something.
Man. Well, there goes the next like couple weeks for you. It's going to be hours of binging.
Oh man, yeah, I've been really enjoying it. I just got set up with a Steam Deck, and I can
Yes.
like play it and still kind of hang out with my kid, and like she's playing with her toys on the floor, and then I'm
Nice.
just slaying the spire.
Yeah.
But
That's awesome.
no,
Yeah,
that's
the
cool.
card and I'll tell you the card game feels great because it's co-op, right? So it's like Slay the Spire. I love the Steam version, but the card game, it was really fun to be deck building with buddies like right there, and you're just I like the co-op nature. Any co-op game I'm in, like I have a
Yeah,
tough time playing solo games, to be honest. There's only certain
yeah,
ones I can like cruise through.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm right there with you. And actually, that sounds awesome. I need to grab that. I bet my wife would love that for like a date night,
Oh,
just
it's great.
playing a co-op game. She's way more into the co-op games than the competitive ones, which is kind of
That's
like
my
how I
wife.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I sort of like
100%.
roped her into playing like D&D and stuff that way because I was like, you're all together. Like it's not, nobody's like against each other. You don't have to feel bad if you
Yeah,
play something wrong or whatever. It's, you're all on a team. So,
that's awesome. But what TTRPGs you been doing?
um, mostly Shadow Dark right now. Um,
Nice.
I've been actually mostly running for like, I ran. I don't know if you've seen that video I did where I ran for my
Yeah, I
family.
did. I did. It was awesome.
And then over the like Christmas break, I ran for my parents and then my brother and my sister-in-law.
What do
And
you
they
what no no what do you think of Shadow? Like I've done a review on it. I've done like a teach video, and I did like an encounter where like I kind of ran myself through an encounter, but I've never actually played or GM'd that game, right? I
I've
just
I've
understand what it's supposed to do, but I've never played it. What do you think?
yeah, no, I love it. I'm probably making it just a bastardized version of it to be honest. But I really like it. It's a solid like intro game as well as
Okay.
like a dedicated kind of old school feel. But I'm saying all the buzzwords here. It's
Yeah,
got
yeah,
like the
yeah.
modern vibes to it because you
Yeah.
still got familiar things like advantage and stuff. I think it hits this nice balance of like giving you just enough to start off with like character ability wise and things like that, but not
Okay.
like just leaving you with absolutely nothing. Because I think
Okay.
like for people I've been playing with, like my family members, they're totally just they're non-gamers, right? Like they don't have
Yeah.
a frame of reference for all this stuff. They don't know what it means to have like derivative stats. They don't care about any of that stuff. They just want to roll
Yeah.
dice. And
Yeah.
so it's nice to have like, okay, you're the fighter. You have these kind of abilities, right? Like right out of the gate. It's like, but it's
Hmm.
it's also not so overwhelming as like Pathfinder or even like sometimes 5e can be, where it's just like now you got to pick a feat. Now your race does this, and now pick your subclass, and before long they're like just jotting down this huge list of things and looking at you like, oh, why am I playing this game?
Got it. Yeah.
So
So in essence, it's like you're playing with individuals who they're because it's new, they're already at that sort of like sweet spot of they're just saying what action they want to do, and then you're telling them, oh, this is what you're gonna have to do to do it.
yeah, and also
Perfect.
like there's also it's also still loose enough that you don't feel totally confined to the character sheet.
Gotcha.
Where
Okay, that makes sense.
and
That's the thing with me is that like my gaming group at their core are very tactical and they love character build tinkering. So it's one
mm,
of those things that even though I run the gamut, like I'd love to be in any kind of game. Like there was a while there where I was really getting into the idea of Fate and I was trying to find people that would run it for me because I don't know how to run that game. But when it comes, I just don't. I've tried to run
yeah,
it and it
same.
was just a train wreck. But my group of gamers that like the buddies I grew up with, they are hardcore character tinkerers. Like they want builds, right? And
Yeah.
so that definitely limits the scope of the games I actually get on the table versus the games I want to play. And so I always love hearing about these kind of more streamlined systems because I want to play in them. I want to see what it's like to be in a little bit more narrative of the game because
Right.
I'm never usually in those.
Yeah. No, I think for me, not to harp on this for too long, but Shadow Dark really does hit that sweet spot for me where it's like you're saying, you can kind of still make stuff up and be like, all right, you know what? Let's call that a loose, like easy check, and we're using strength.
Gotcha.
We're knocking the door down, you know. And I think it still lets, at least in my experience, playing with literally all of my, immediate family at this point,
Yeah.
um, they latched onto it so quick. I basically just shoved pre-gens in front of me, and I was like, don't worry too much about what's on your sheet. If it comes
Nice.
up, I'll try to make you aware of it. Otherwise, tell me what you want to do, and I'll tell you what you need to roll. And that's 90% of the game, you know?
That's perfect. Yeah, I told you the only game that I've kind of gotten to play in the not too distant past that was kind of that realm was Quest. And that was a game where it
Oh,
felt very much like that, like very simple rule. I mean, that's even more simple of a game than Shadow Dark. But the people loved like the feel of it, the cards, everything that was going on with it. And so that was the last time I got to do it. But it was a perfect like one shot. It happened to be with my gaming buddies, and we were at a cabin again. And it was one of those things where it was like we had 3 nights to play games, and we're not going to roll up massive Pathfinder
yeah.
2 type characters.
Yeah.
So I happened to bring Quest, and they ate it up. But I could see them. There was no chance they were going to play a 10 session, campaign of that game because I just know those guys.
Yeah.
But it was great.
Man, you and I think it was Kinder from my Discord keep talking about Quest, and it just sounds really cool. I like the sort of like Mad Libs character sheet style thing.
That's so great. It is. It really lends itself to that sort of like, let's play something right now. And so you just bust out these Mad Lib character sheets and these Mad Lib world building. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, you've got a story and you just dish out these cards and people pick 3 abilities or 4 abilities and you go. And so it's one of those things that it feels so fast to the table and there's no rules. It's just a D20 and it's like, things are far or close or nearby or whatever, and then you've got a D20 and you're trying to roll, an 11 or higher, and that's it. And so that's very narrative. And so that was a ton of fun. I forgot that I got to play that, even though I used to talk about that a ton on my channel because it was a while back that I played it. But yeah, it's a fun game. It's beautiful. I think it's beautiful with the cards.
Oh yeah, that's such a cool concept. I also like what you said there. Like I like this sort of melting away of the grid, right? Like some of these games are just like you're either near, you're far, or it's like right up on you. And man, that's just so much easier to manage whenever you're doing like theater of the mind or even, a rough drawn map or whatever that you just throw out on like a VTT.
Absolutely. That's what I've been trying to go more and more that route. It's like, even though I use something like Foundry, which is this, Foundry virtual tabletop's got all these tools.
Mm-hmm.
Like my current weekly game is, I don't even find map images anymore. I literally just draw in Foundry and I draw this big old circle and I say, this is where you are. And I draw another circle and I go, that's where they are. And then we just go.
It's kind of like zones, right?
Yeah, I kind of try and do zones more. I try and do zones. I had a problem where I went a little too hard into zones for a while there.
Yeah.
And I tried to give too much rules to each zone. And I found that started to become unwieldy. But then I started making it a little bit more abstract. And the more abstract I made it, it felt better. It felt more natural, felt more like loose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did zones like, I think I first discovered zones. It sounds so weird to say discovered, but the first time I saw zones, it sounds so stupid. But the first time I saw zones,
we're all discovering something new every time we open an
I know,
RPG.
it just sounds really weird when you say it like that. The first time I saw zones was in Fate, and I liked it. And then I tried to put that in my game, but I like hyper. This was a early iteration of the game, and I hyper sort of iterated zones. And my idea was, I was like, all right, let's have, if you've got a room and I would have like 8 zones in that room, right? Like every location was a zone.
Right.
Yeah, I went crazy. And then
I'm laughing because I went on the same path when I was
did you?
writing a game myself. I really went deep into the zone stuff.
Oh, dude, I went so deep. Well, and here's the twist on my zone twist was that I took Hankerin's idea of ICRPG where you had every encounter had its own DC. Like, this is a 14 DC encounter, right? Deal with it. Every monster, it takes 14 to hit. Every skill you do is a 14, whatever. Like, he had that idea in ICRPG.
Every saving, whatever.
Everything. Yeah, yep. It's like, hey, this is a 10 DC encounter. Everything's 10. I did that with zones. So it was like, when you're in this zone is a 12 DC. When you're in this zone, it's a 16 DC. And so it was madness. But people loved it because to the gamers, they were like, oh, I'm going to try and pull that monster here, and the big bad monsters in that zone. And then I had this ability where it was like, in essence, I made an action in the game where if you wanted to, you could take your entire action and you could swap zone DCs with someone else if they were in a different zone, but you always had to take the harder DC. So then you
Okay.
had this interesting scenario where like the rogue is running off into this easy zone and then he's swapping it with the tank who's in the hard zone. And it was very crazy. It was manic, right? Because I'm sitting here erasing numbers and putting them in other places, but the players loved it. It was just too much.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Like, it's funny, man. I feel like I'm going to get a lot of designers on this podcast between like you and Peter and myself. We're probably going to end up talking a lot of shop about designing games, but it is funny sometimes when you have like something like conceptually on paper, and then you bring it to the table and somebody plays it, and you're like, oh wow, you guys really latched onto that idea in a big way.
And yeah, especially when it's like a small side thing, and you're like, oh, that's the only thing they really like, and now you've got to design the game on that as opposed to all this other fluff that you had. You've got to trim all that down, and yeah, that was a fun one. They actually really loved that swapping the DCs around, but
Well,
it just
you
got
know what?
unwieldy.
I think that actually is a perfect segue into the main topic of today's episode, which is making your players feel clever.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing. So I appreciate the segue here, Jorbin. So
Yeah.
I think that all of us that are probably listening to this podcast are probably people who are probably GMs, and we're
Yep.
all probably trying to become better GMs. And part of that is this idea of like, some people will say, "Oh, GMs aren't storytellers; they're referees," and some people will be like, "No, we do craft story," and there's all this kind of back and forth. But whatever the
Oh
case
yeah.
might be, yeah, whatever the case might be, I kind of went down a rabbit hole of like how much storytelling should the GM do? And I started analyzing different books and different like courses on storytelling, blah blah blah. And
Oh wow.
I
You're
went
that kind
down.
of guy.
Oh God, I'm a nerd. Yeah, I went down. I watched the whole. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, Brandon Sanderson has a free BYU course on YouTube on the subject of writing books.
Yeah.
But what's great about it is the ideas that he puts into it. You could translate a lot of them into tabletop RPGs, right?
Well, yeah,
And
that's where that weird line is, right? Where it's like
yeah,
it's a storytelling game, but it's also a dice game, right? Like, and
absolutely.
there's so much stuff that pairs together. Because like, I'm a writer too. Like, I'm trying to write a fantasy novel on the
Oh,
side,
nice.
which is not really happening now that I have a kid. But point being that I've watched those videos because
Oh,
I
cool.
went in knowing nothing about writing whenever I started, and I was also, my GM brain lit up, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is so applicable to like D&D games."
Yes.
But yeah, sorry, go ahead. I
No,
interrupted.
no, but I agree with you. It's this fine line where it's 100% applicable, but at the same time, you could see how it could be like you don't want to be you understand what people say when they say we're not storytellers because that could lead to railroading, right? In the sense
Right.
that the GM's trying to create a particular narrative, and that's a problem. And so that made me land on this idea that, I started analyzing not analyzing, well, I guess it is analyzing, that like you play a session and you look back on the session, you're like, why did that work? Right? All my players
Yeah.
had fun. Why did it work? And you're thinking about, well, what did I do from these like courses I learned? Nothing. I didn't do any of that stuff, right? The only two things I seem to do that my players, at least my table, the only time that my table seems to be, I shouldn't say that. That's a little bit extreme, but it seems that the times my players have the most fun is when I'm doing two things, and that's surprising them and trying to make sure they feel clever, right?
Mhm.
Those are
Yeah.
the two things that it seems to be the most payoff for them then feeling like that was an awesome session, right? When they feel
Yeah.
clever and when they got surprised.
Yeah, for sure. No, and it is a balance, right? Like, I don't know what you learned from your deep dive study into, the sort of percentile between storytelling and just gaming that you did, but oh man, actually now
Probably
I'm thinking of
nothing.
this.
Probably nothing. I mean, let's
I,
be
I heard
honest
a
here.
I heard a quote earlier today that I love. I think it was Sean Merwin.
Okay.
He said, D&D is either a storytelling game with a dice problem or a dice game with a storytelling problem. Which I was like, that's so perfectly put because it really is like it's a marriage of these two different ideas in such a weird, wobbly space that we try to make work every week. or whatever every month that we play. But man, isn't it like a delicate balance to get that
Oh my
just
gosh.
right?
Absolutely. And I don't know how, and I'd be really curious how, if people chime in at some point in time, whether they leave comments somewhere or they get to you directly.
Yeah.
But one of the things I was always curious about is like, because once again, all I do is try and make them feel clever and do surprising things. But something I'm terrible at, which I always hear about from other GMs as being like the backbone of their game. And it's one of the reasons why there's two games I'd mentioned that I am really interested in. But the thing that I'm really terrible at is weaving in characters' backstories.
Mm,
Like, I always just forget about those damn backstories that players make at the very beginning of the like session one. Like, I've got good intentions. I write some
yeah.
notes down, but then it never comes back. And I don't know, do you feel like you're good at weaving that into your campaign?
Oh, here's where I'm going to give you a not satisfying answer and say it totally depends on the game, right?
Okay.
Like I've played, I cut my teeth on a lot of Pathfinder and D&D 5th edition, and at the time I was
Okay.
watching lots of live plays like Critical Role and stuff, and so I was like, "Oh, this is what you do. You weave in all the backstories and things like that." I've
Yeah.
sort of changed my stance with that over time because I ran a game for like I'm going to say two different games for 2 years each with the same players, and they're both 5th edition games, and I really, really took a lot of time to like internalize the backstories of my players,
Okay.
internalize their character stories, and I would find ways to weave them in here and there. But I'll just say I was a single dude then. I had a lot of free time. I didn't have any kids.
Yeah.
Um,
I hear you.
I
I hear
I
you.
had a job I did not focus too heavily on, so I had a lot of time to think about this kind of stuff. But the culture has shifted a lot too, like in the last, I don't know, 10 years, and my tastes have changed. Like
Yeah.
I've been gearing up for this Shadow Dark West Marchers game, right? And like
Hmm.
the first thing someone asked me, one of my good buddies, he was like, "So like, what's the world like? What do I need to prepare background wise?" And I was like, "I would not prepare anything. I wouldn't
Don't
put more
prepare
than a
anything.
sentence.
Yeah.
A sentence of who your character is, because you guys are going to be level one on a strange, deadly island shipwrecked. That's all you need to know. And
Perfect.
you may die in the first session. You might not make it through the like opening scene I do at session 0. So
Mm.
it, that's a long-winded way of saying it really depends on the game, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're playing
Yeah.
Fate, yeah, probably try to weave in those backgrounds. But if you're playing like old school essentials, don't even bother. You know,
Yeah,
your wizard's gonna die.
you have more of an exploratory background where it's coming out as you're playing, and all of a sudden the player is suggesting things. Hey, could this be a part of my? Yeah, sure. Let's say this guy you knew, and you is that kind of experience more.
Yeah. Well, and not to sidetrack this conversation too far, but I just put out a video where I talked about like I called it something dumb like fixing deadly games, but really it was
Mm,
like how to lean in and embrace deadly games. That's just the clickbait title, but like the
gotcha.
idea that you almost want to focus on the company and their goals more than any
Oh yeah,
individual
yeah, yeah. I did
character.
see that. I did. I actually watched that one because I love that idea because I'm really into that idea of like you were referencing how Blades in the Dark has like the guild of sorts.
Right. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I agree. I agree. I think that's a fantastic way of handling that. It's almost like what was it? The
Darkest
Matt
Dungeon is one of
Colville.
the. Oh, okay. Yeah,
I
Matt
was gonna
Colville.
say, what was his the chain of
The
Acheron?
chain, yeah. That's
Yeah, that
that's
same
kind of where that
idea.
idea emerged, actually.
Was
Yeah, it
it?
was same time I was like getting into a lot of those live plays and stuff, and I was like, man, that's so cool because then if someone dies, they're still tied to the chain. They're still in the army or
Perfect.
whatever.
It's
Same
perfect.
goals.
Yeah.
But we got way derailed. I think you had asked me, how do I tie characters' backgrounds into the story? Um, which, yeah, the short answer is I don't really know. But
Hmm.
if that is something you're interested in, you know, there's lots of it really goes back to what we were saying about like story writing. Actually, to reference the same video I think you're referencing, Brandon Sanderson has these concepts called, oh, it's like the three P's. It's like
Plot progress and payoffs.
yeah, promises, yeah,
Promises.
uh,
Promises.
promises, plot, and payoff, or something, or progress and
Progress.
payoff.
Yeah. Promise. Progress. Payoffs. Blah.
So, yeah, what you basically want to do is you look at that character's background, you figure out what the sort of promise of that character's story is, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if if his family was slaughtered by a band of orcs, the promise is that he's going to get revenge one day.
Yeah.
And so the progress is him like sort of finding his way to whether or not he feels like he needs that revenge, and then ultimately the payoff is, well, you better at least encounter that group of orcs that slayed his family or whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's so esoteric, and that maybe
Well,
is my ultimate rub with it, right?
yeah, but I was going to say that this is what brought me to two games that I'm fascinated with, and I'm still trying to figure out how I want to weave it into my own design concepts. But do you ever watch Quinn's Quest?
No.
Okay, so Quinn's Quest. So for those that are listening that don't know Quinn's Quest is a YouTube channel that is, I think, for a TTRPG, it's a must watch. And Quinn was one of the creators of Shut Up and Sit Down, which is a YouTube channel for board game reviews. And he did a spin-off called Quinn's Quest, and it's fabulous. And he's just hilarious. And he's an old school YouTuber, so his production's through the roof. It's awesome.
Oh, I think I've seen exactly
Oh,
one of his videos. I think
dude,
it was
he's
on
fabulous.
Alice is Missing.
Yes, he did one on Alice is Missing. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I'm tracking with you now.
Yeah, so there were two games that he did that had this concepts that were fantastic, right? One of them was Heart, which I'm sure a lot of listeners have probably heard of Heart Inspire. And what Heart had, which was fantastic, but it's weird. It's one of these things that's weird, right? Where in essence, Heart had these callings, right? And these callings were things like, well, I can probably ad lib it, so it's all good. So the idea being that it has these callings, right? And these callings are, I wish I had an example of what one of the callings was, but maybe it's like you're indebted, right? Or like you are, it's not indebted, but it's something to that effect where it's like you work for someone else. Like you're not in your own sort of like control, right?
Yeah.
Like or it's like a calling for adventure. Like your calling is adventure. Like that's its thing. And what happens, you choose one of these callings, and then the callings literally have lists of beats, right? They have minor beats, major beats, and zenith beats. And these beats are things that when you achieve them, you then are going to level. Like you literally have to hit these beats to level. And what's crazy about this game is, I believe the way he described it is before every session. Like if you're talking about no preparation for a GM, this is like crazy no preparation if you did it literally while you were sitting down for a session. But in essence, what the players would do is they choose like 2 to 3 beats and they literally give it to the GM and they say, these are the beats I hope happen soon. And the
Oh, that's
GM's
cool.
job is now to take these, if they've got 3 players or 4 players, these 9 to 12 beats and figure out how they're going to weave them together into the next session or two, right? And so let me give you an idea of some of the beats. So if you have,
Real quick before you
yeah,
go on, because I know we're both YouTubers and we can talk ad nauseum about this stuff. But I really like. I just want to cut in and say, I
yeah,
really like that conceptually. It actually kind of fixes the issue I have with like just sort of trying to weave in character motivations and stuff like that, because it actually
yeah.
it gets the input directly from that player and says like, here are the things I want to accomplish through this character, rather
Well,
than me doing all the guesswork on the other end.
absolutely. And it's crazy because it's literally like, I want this to happen now. It's like
Mhm.
it's literally just saying, I want this kind of thing to happen. And some of the things they're not as like um general, they're not as broad as you might think. Some of them are very specific in this game because of the setting's so specific, right? Like it's a very evocative setting, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'll just give like a couple real quick just because I think it's interesting. But like minor beats for an adventurer might be defeat a powerful foe one-on-one, help an important or influential figure in a haven, right? So it's like very specific things.
Yeah.
And now you as a player or as a GM get to try and weave that. I think that's fascinating where you're just like, hey, tell me exactly what you want to do.
Yes, I totally dig that. See, that's like you can almost even just transplant that into any game you're playing that doesn't already have a structure like that in place, you know?
Absolutely. I think that would be really, I mean, that you just erase the whatever the XP system instead of using milestones where it's like, hey, guess what? We all level.
We
You could
we
do
found the
this.
orc camp. We did it.
Yeah, we did it. Hooray. Now
Here's
you're
your
like,
gold star.
yeah, exactly. Now you made it to your camp and you just beat that chieftain one-on-one. Guess what? You got a major beat. Like, that's awesome sounding, right?
And guess what? That was the orc chieftain that murdered your family 20 years ago.
Boom, right? Boom. We brought it back full circle.
Yep.
Yeah, so Heart was one of those ones that this is me looking at games and trying to say, God, that would make my life easier. And the other one he had was Slugbuster, which is a very weird game.
Cool name.
Very cool name. Very weird game. But this game, what it had instead of where you had these zenith beats, it was something kind of similar, where there were in essence like arcs, but these were very like once again, it's one of those things where the arcs fit the system, because I think this game is kind of like Kids on Bikes, but just there's time travel or dimensional travel or something.
Okay.
And so like the beats were things like what you would expect kids to kind of go through a little bit. I wish I
Okay.
had a list of them. I don't own this game, but what was neat was like you would have an arc, and it would be like, I don't know, like let me like
Overcome the bully.
yeah, something like that, like overcome the bully, right? And then there would be 5 bullet points underneath that are almost like a story arc, right? Where it's like the 4th bullet, for instance, might be really bad because you always have that dip on your way to your journey.
Right.
And then the 5th one is the success. And you could at any point in time abandon an arc and do a different arc. So you might end with your arc being kind of crappy, right? Or maybe it gets better. So once again, it's another way of like unloading that pressure that the GM might have of how do I weave your stories into my game? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like basically creating mechanics for the sort of like hero's journey, if you're familiar with
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's trying to figure out how to make that hero's journey mechanical and a little bit more on the player's responsibility
Yeah.
to let me know what this is and bring it to my attention so that I can then, weave it in, which I think is fascinating, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
You ever
and just real quick to touch back on what we were saying earlier, that is sort of my, I don't know, beef is not quite the word I want to look for, but I'll use it. My beef with like just do it yourself, kind of like weaving the backstories in. If there's
Mhm.
a structure, then we have something to play off of between the players and the GM.
Yes,
But if you're just doing it all ad lib, making it all up as you go, it's gonna get messy. You're gonna like step on the toes of the player, and you're gonna do something they didn't want with their character or didn't intend for their character to do. So
absolutely.
I just really like that idea of like, here's 5 bullet points, and we're gonna go through your arc at some point.
Absolutely. I mean, this is supposed to be shared storytelling, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
that's the whole point. And so I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and when I think back, even like these were my dark years of GMing, right? Where like I was just watching too much stuff online and playing straight out of the book, like rules is written, no interpretation, nothing. So I was just making it all up from the seat of my pants. And
That's always fun though, man. That's always like those are some of those stories are the ones you remember most probably.
yeah, I mean, there were some great times, but also, man, I like any video where you see top 10 worst mistakes of a GM, I was doing like 100%.
Excellent. We all did. We all
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
So
You gotta start somewhere.
what have you done? Have you done anything similar to these sort of concepts of these like arcs and beats or
Um, oh, let me think.
what have you
So,
found out there that has helped you with the storytelling component of your game, do you think?
I've come to realize that I really do like the handing over of the reins from the GM to like giving the player a moment to say like, oh, you know what do you think, or whatever, you see someone in the crowd, you
Mm.
recognize a face, who is it from your past? Those sorts of moments, right, where you like
Yeah,
you give over a little bit of the control to the player side, and you say like, hey, insert your part of the story into this scene, right? Like
absolutely.
make this interesting for you in whatever character you're playing. So that's something I've really started to embrace as I've grown as a GM.
Mm.
Those are more prevalent in a lot of modern games, and sometimes it involves like a meta currency like in a Cipher system or something, where it's like, here's a GM intrusion or like the player intrusion version. But
Yeah, but I like how you're describing it as a non-mechanical intrusion, but more of just a quick invitation, because you're not, those intrusions are typically supposed to be scene busters, right? Whereas
Right.
you're just creating the scene still, and it's a very simple, like, you're just putting set dressing on the scene, and you're letting them help set the dressing. What am I saying here? Put the, yeah, you know
you're
what I
you're
mean?
you're letting them pick the paint.
Dressing the set. Yeah, you're letting them pick the paint to make they feel better in that room. So this analogy is getting away from me, but you get the idea. You get the idea. That
Yeah, absolutely.
as opposed to, you're right, in something like Fate, you use that meta currency to add something immediately. By the way, there's a wood chopper here, and I'm going to grab it because I'm going to spin this Fate points. Whereas you're just saying, I think that's a great example of, there's a person here. Who is this person from your backstory?
Right.
That's wonderful.
And I think those are really the moments when you can weave in a backstory, right? Like, this is also something I have to put on like a post-it note and stick to my GM screen, because otherwise, in the moment, I'm probably going to totally forget to ask these questions. And like in the past, some of the ways they've come about is I'll say more experienced players going like, "Hey, we're in a bar, right? So like, is there, I don't know, a chair I can break over this guy's head, right? Like that's sort of
Hmm.
like coming from the other side of the screen, a way to like introduce some, I don't know, some give and take from the players to the
Yeah.
GM. But like, yeah, I haven't. I think with the position of the game master, if you're the one offering up those moments, then like characters, or rather players of those characters, really get more excited about it when they go, "Oh, I get to choose," or or they get like deer in the headlights sometimes, and they're just like, I don't know, my character's ex girlfriend," and then you're like, "Oh wow, this just got, infinitely more interesting."
Yeah. But
uh,
what I would love about that too, though, is like, what's one of the things we always hear about in games? It's like, especially on Colville's channel, he always talks about the drama, right? Like, you want drama, you want
mhm.
drama. And I think that one of the challenges is that you watch these actual plays where there's all this drama, but these are very talented actors or individuals, and so the drama comes naturally to them. And I think that sometimes you'll see GMs that are trying to fabricate drama, and it becomes very, there's a lot of friction there, right? Because they're trying
Yeah,
to create drama. It's like, no, I really want you to be emotionally invested here. And they're like, I don't even know these guys. Whereas when you let them, what you're saying, like when you let them create the NPC in that moment, there's already this attachment. Like, they just created that guy, and now you're going to do something to that person. And all of a
yeah,
sudden, there's a different level of attachment there in emotion, which I think is, it's a small push in the right direction of that drama, and sometimes that's enough, right?
yeah. I also think it's, I don't know, after GMing whatever 10,000 hours of games, you hit
Yeah,
a certain point where you like to be surprised too, like. And
absolutely.
it really like keeps you on your toes whenever you have to hand over the reins for a second, and then you're like, okay, well, I wasn't expecting it to be, the guy's real dad revealed himself or something, and now I have to play off of that. Oh
Yeah,
man.
I
All
think
right,
I
here we
think
go.
I think every GM needs one of those agent of chaos type of players that just want to see crazy stuff happening, because it just makes it so much more fun for the GM, I think, personally.
Yeah, for sure. No, I definitely fluctuate hard between. I was telling a friend this the other day. My characters, when I do get to play, I'm always either Deadpool or I'm Wolverine. I'm like, I'm
One
the
of the
straight
two.
man or I'm pure chaos. And
What was
it
your
just,
favorite? Did you ever get to go to, when you're at conventions, right?
yeah.
And I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No,
I
you're
just
good.
you made me think of this. When you go to conventions, if you have and you've played with randos, like, what is your favorite type of character at those sort of settings?
Yeah, see, that's where I am one of those two. I'm
Oh,
usually playing off everyone else. I kind of let everyone else either intro, or I just give a vague idea of who my character is.
hmm,
And then once I kind of feel out the party, I'm like, oh, you know what? Everyone's kind of like a wacko here, and we need really like a Wolverine. We need a straight
yeah,
man who's
yeah,
just going to be like, all right, let's get this job done. What are we doing here?
perfect.
But yeah, it fluctuates too, just depending on my mood, to be honest.
I
You
get
know.
that. I get that.
What about you? Do you have a type you go for, or is it just kind of a mix?
Oh, um, you know, once again, it depends on the scenario, like you're talking about. I think that's I think that any experienced player is probably going to say it depends on the scenario, because I think an experienced player is going to have that I'm playing for the table. That I've got to fit into this table, and it's not just I'm doing my own thing, right?
Yep.
So I think any experienced player is going to be like, oh, it depends. I'll tell you my favorite. This was my favorite rando, right? So I'm not trying to flex here or anything, but I'm just going to say it.
Not a humble brag like you did
This
earlier,
is not a humble
dropping
brag.
Brandon.
No, this is a weird brag. I'm not gonna lie. So I got a buddy who he used to be. This is random. This is gonna be a random story time with Uncle Jface.
All right, we're doing a side quest moment.
Side quest. I got a buddy. This was like, I had a buddy who his job was he was marketing for the video game Madden Football, right? Like he was the head marketer for Madden Football.
I would not want that job.
I know, it was crazy. And when he left that job, he was now trying to find a new job. And he now was being hired, potentially. He was getting an interview with, at the time, Wizard of the Coast, when they were starting to create 5th edition, right? They were in the play test, which was D&D Next at the time, and they were doing all those surveys and stuff. And so he comes to me and he's like, Trent, I haven't played D&D since like 1st edition. Can you tell me the history of what's happened since then? And so I've got to tell him about 3rd edition.
Good luck.
Yeah, I'm going through 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 3.5, Pathfinder Split, Voreen, WoW, all that stuff. And so he gets the job, right? So now he's the head of marketing at Dungeons and Dragons during 5th edition, right? So and so via him, I didn't get to meet all these people, but he's meeting he's meeting Matt Mercer, and he's got Joe Manganiello on his cell phone. They're talking about this, and it's wild, right? But I get to go to the first Gen Con where they released 5th edition, and they did this epic, right? It's like this. What's his name? Mike Merles is running an epic encounter, and it's 30 tables, and every table is doing a different scenario, and all the tables, whatever you do at your table, affects the main story plot. And then, Mike Merles is running the center table, right? And so I get put, because my buddy's there, and he's like, I'm going to put you at this table. And so I get put at this table, and it's all these designers for D&D at the time. I could list them off, but it was all these designers. And so it was very intimidating. You can imagine, like, this is like 12 years ago, or 10 years, not 12, whatever, like 10 years ago, and I'm sitting here with all these guys that are like designing the game, and I'm freaking out.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, I know that guy over there.
You're like, oh, God. And it was also like authors. Like I'm sitting next to this guy who's like an author of these books. He was awesome. So the character I brought for that, and the reason that was all just fun story time. But the character I brought for that, which became my favorite character to bring to any of these sessions, was I was like, how do I bring a character? Because I'm not going to upstage these individuals, right? And that's not my goal, right? I want to just improve their experience. So I had this character who was a fighter bard, right? And he was an old man. And he was like, his fighter was also like protection. Like he had the protection feat. So he would try and, help someone else and yada, yada. And his bard was like, all the abilities were trying to buff someone else. And so his story was that he's an old man who's like, his time is coming, and he's still trying to write that perfect story. And so he's trying to find that hero for that story. And so what I would do at a table is I would attach myself to a player, and I would make it out to be that, like, I have finally found you. And then the entire session, I'm just I'm giving them all my inspiration. I'm fairy firing all their targets.
You're the chronicler to Kavoth, if you get that reference.
Oh, nice. Yeah, exactly. So that was the idea. It was like this, I'm just going to make them a badass. And that was always fun, because they like, that's what you do at those tables. And so after I did it that one time, I was hooked. And so whenever I did a convention, I always tried to pick that type of class to kind of, and then I would pick like little kids, like, like there's like a 12-year-old there for the first time, and you're like, you must be the chosen one, and the kid's freaking out, and like, man,
can I just say, that's the most forever GM character I've ever heard. Just because I've been that character too, right? Like, where you're like, I'll just support, and I'll like lean into the other characters because I never play. gonna be.
100%.
I'm always the GM. I'm always like doing all the characters. So like I'm just gonna be blend into the background, support everyone else.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
that's hilarious. Yeah, I've definitely been not that exact character, but you know what I mean, that role, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that 100%. Where you're just trying to help someone else find their narrative, if that's the case, or just improve their experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So well, we are coming up on about 45 minutes here, and
Oh, that was fast. That
yeah,
was super
time,
fast.
yeah, it's good conversation. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
That was an awesome conversation. It's been great to have you, JFace.
Been awesome being here,
Where
buddy.
can folk find you?
Where they can find me is JFace Games on YouTube currently. That's the only real place. That I do have a Substack as well, JFace Games Substack, and those are the two places. For the game in the future when it's going to be released, I would say either those two or my Discord channel. We're going to be dropping announcements constantly. So
Cool. Well, listeners, send in your questions for future episodes. You can email at goblinscan'tread@gmail.com. No apostrophe. And if we're having a slow week on the show, then I'll read off a couple of those questions. And yeah, thanks for being on here. Final question. Is there anything in TTRPGs that's been exciting you lately, like a system, concept, campaign, character, anything?
things that have been exciting me lately in TTRPG. I have to give me 2 seconds to think about that because there's, to be honest,
Thumivore.
Thamavor. I'm so bad at saying his name. No, no, no. So I've been really. I think that his channel has been evolving even more, and I really enjoy watching his videos. And he recently had a video on a game called Break, and
Okay.
because I'm in this designing a book headspace currently, I was looking at his thumbing through that book in the PDF, and he gushes over the book itself. And there's so many things that book does that you're just like, damn, that looks really nice. And it looks very user friendly and it looks very inviting. And so, to be honest, I'm in this weird space right now where even though my YouTube channel is all about mechanics, I'm really looking at aesthetics and design and layout a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I'm right there with you.
Oh, it's just so many games do so many cool things. And I think Break is one of those ones where you're just like, damn, that's amazing.
Cool. Well, check out Break, folks. You heard it here first, or second, or third.
Probably like fifth, to be honest. It's not.
Yeah,
That's. I'm a little late to the party on that one, probably.
That's fine. Nobody's going to be listening to this anyway. So
Oh, great.
whatever.
Don't sell yourself short.
Well, awesome, man. It's great to have you. We'll have to get you back on here soon.
Can't wait,
I'm gonna
man. I can't wait.
do like a round robin style with a couple people, and then
Yeah.
come back around to some familiar faces and have some
Maybe
new
actually hit the
conversation.
topic we were intending to hit next time.
Yeah, yeah. Make your players feel clever. Well, one way to make them feel clever is to keep them guessing. And here at the Quantum Ogre Cast, that is exactly what we're all about. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome, dude. That was fun.
Oh, one more thing I forgot. So real quick, I just want to plug JeffWittyArt for doing the art for the Quantum Ogre Cast. It's an awesome piece of work. He's working on some DCC stuff right now. Go check out his Instagram, or I'll probably put a link in the description below. So
Yeah.
cool.
I just want to give a shout out to Jeff Whitty that the fact that his first Instagram picture I see is Starman from Pro Wrestling Nintendo, which was the character I played when I played Pro Wrestling Nintendo. So
Oh,
that's
that's
friggin'
awesome.
awesome.